Hi, yes. So we are really pleased to have as our keynote speaker Professor Carron Shankland. So Carron, when we asked if Carron would do as a keynote talk, this is one of the things that was really nice about Carron. She's a professor, she's a busy person, you know, she's worked in all sorts of computing fields, so she's done process algebra, she's done models of how disease progresses through different networks of people. She's done all of this wonderful stuff, and yet, when we ask her to do a keynote talk for this conference, she comes up with different ideas that are targeted at you, at this audience. And that's one of the things I really like, that you can get to a level of being top of your profession, and you still take the time to target every talk to the audience that you have here, and that's so nice of her. So she offered us several talks, and we think the Lovelace audience is going to like this talk. So I'm going to hand over to Carron, and hopefully you're going to like this talk.
Thank you, Amanda. And I have turned on the microphone.
Turn on the microphone.
I have turned on the microphone. Wow. You look amazing. I can't tell you how exciting it is actually to be asked to keynote at Lovelace, and also slightly terrifying as well. I feel like it's okay to say that, you know. It's okay to say, even at my advanced stage, I am still a bit anxious about doing talks, especially to such an illustrious audience. Okay, so this is the talk that I'm doing for you. There's going to be a bit about me, because I feel like I need to justify who I am and why I'm here talking to you, and tell you a bit about myself, because I think it's nice for you to know who is the person here, not just what research I'm doing. And then most of the talk is going to be this question about representation of women in AI-generated images. I'm going to say straight up, I should have put Lucy's name on the slide as well. The work is really done by a student of mine, Lucy Anscombe. She's a master's student, but she couldn't be here today. We did this talk, a version of this talk recently, and we tag-teamed it, which was quite good. So I'm going to be talking about her research, which I supervised. I'm going to ask you some questions as we go along, which are just the kind of questions where you can, you know, raise your hand and yes or no kind of questions. You may well have questions for me. I'm happy to take questions as we go if it's something really pressing, but we'll leave time at the end for questions, so that's probably the easiest thing to do for questions. Okay, so who am I? I was born in an area of Glasgow called Maryhill. This is me when I was about 5. That's my mum and dad. My mum and dad were quite aspirational for me, I think. So my dad was the first in his family to go to university. I was always going to go to university because of that, really. And my mum's mum was a teacher as well, so it kind of a little bit runs in the family. It was just as well that they had aspirations for me, because the school that I went to did not have aspirations for anybody who was at the school. So some of the things that I came across when I was at school, I had one guidance teacher who said, you know, don't let a boy beat you. Because there was, you know, me and this boy, Stephen, were kind of vying for the top spot in subjects all the time. But equally, I had a physics teacher who didn't understand what I was doing in his higher physics class, because I was a girl. I didn't really get on with physics after that. My parents also gave me, I think, a memorable and easy to misspell name. That kind of goes around with you through life. And this is my partner, Pat. So we're very happy together. We've been together for 20 years now, which is amazing. And I feel slightly embarrassed, although I did choose to put this picture up here, because it's important to acknowledge if you get awards and things like that. So I was awarded the Suffrage Science Award in 2016. There were 16 of us, no, 12 of us, I can't count, who got the prize in that year. So you can see me in the green there. And I've also put a square around this one. This is Muffy Calder, who is my PhD supervisor and kind of a mentor to me ever since then. And of course, there are other Suffrage Science Award winners in the room. You can find out who they are. Okay, who am I? I was talking to people last night from Sheffield, and they were excited about, going out into the world and starting jobs soon. And I was like, I went to university and then I never left. So, 1985, I went to Glasgow University to do a computing science degree. Did my degrees at Glasgow University. After a postdoc, I went to Glasgow Cali. It was really terrible. I didn't like it. I stayed there for 9 months. I think that tells you everything you need to know, really. And then I went to University of Stirling, and I was there until I retired at the end of last year. So now this is kind of like a new chapter because I'm a retired person. But I am also an honorary senior research fellow at the University of Glasgow. So I've kind of gone back round to where I started, which is delightful. And that means I have more time to do cool things like this, that really we should have more time to do as academics anyway, but... pictures. The most important picture on this slide, this is this person here. This is Rachel Norman. She started at Stirling at the same time as me. She's a professor of aquatic food security, maths, basically. We're best friends, and we have been since 1996. And this was us celebrating 25 years of working at the university. We went out for a nice lunch. It was lovely. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the kind of more technical, but not very technical, part of the talk. So the question is really about representation. So when I look out in the world, do I see people that look like me? You've heard that thing, if you can see it, you can be it. So if you can see a role model that represents the kind of thing that you want to be, then it makes it a little bit easier to imagine yourself in that role. So therefore, the converse of that is, if you don't have those role models, you don't have those images of who you're going to be, that makes it really difficult. A bit more difficult, let's say. And that's one of the reasons why a conference like Lovelace is amazingly important. Because right here in this room, you've got another 159 role models that show you what it's like to be a woman in computing. Yeah? And that's something that you maybe don't have access to in your own university quite so much, because most of you will come from universities where the number of women who are studying computing is quite small. So I always feel you come somewhere like Lovelace and it's just phenomenal that there's loads of women doing computing, but just not in my department. Okay, I think there's another thing about representation as well, and I was thinking about this as I was putting together the talk and choosing pictures, right? So of course I chose pictures of myself, happy and smiley, and the nice pictures, right? I didn't choose horrible pictures of myself. Why would I do that? But when you look on social media, all you see are nice pictures of other people, right? And everybody looks more attractive, more athletic, more successful, happier. It's kind of overwhelming, I think. So that people don't post, generally, pictures of themselves being depressed and the failures, but those things still exist. So it's kind of important to talk about those as well, although that's not entirely what I'm going to talk about today. So thinking about where am I, do I see lots of images of plump, middle-aged, white-haired, white lesbians on social media? No, really. Where are you? So do you find that you see images of yourself in social media Actually, that is a question for you. Do you feel like you're represented? Yes. Raise your hand if you think yes. Wow. Okay. That's terrible, isn't it? You feel I mean, nearly everybody in this room is like, I don't really see myself in the world. So this is what I'm going to talk about, and why that's important and why we need to do more about it. Okay, so thinking about representation of women in the media. So this is kind of more specifically about film and television, but it sets the scene for what I want to talk about. So in films, women are about a third of movie protagonists. And of course, the global population, women and men, are about 50-50. Women account for 37% of speaking characters, right? So women aren't really allowed to talk in movies quite as much. This graph, yeah, hopefully you can see it. The details are not too important, although you can probably read the names of the films. So these are the best pictures. It's an analysis of the best picture winning films over several years. And what the bars show is, to the left, the red bars show the amount of dialogue given to women, and the green bars to the right show the amount of dialogue given to men. And it would be no surprise to, given the nature of this talk, that most of the dialogue is given to men. So very few films actually have even a reasonable amount. Here's this one, Chicago, that had a lot of strong female characters in it, so thank goodness they at least have a good representation of women speaking. I've mentioned here the Bechdel test. How many of you are familiar with the Bechdel test? Yeah, quite a few. Okay, good. Alison Bechdel is a cartoonist, and she put forward this idea just as part of a cartoon, but it's become adopted as a way of saying, is this film representational? So does it feature at least two named female characters who speak to one another about something other than a man? Okay, I mean, we shouldn't really need these things, but we do. Thinking about older women in the media gets worse. Okay, so 28% of the global population are over 50. Okay, in movies, that's 21.8%. Okay, that's not, I mean, it's not 28%, but it's not very far away from 28%, so hopefully the gap can close there. But all of those characters, we would again expect roughly 50-50 of those characters should be men and women. In fact, possibly slightly more women, because women tend to live a bit longer than men. But only 25% of those characters are women. And women over 50 hardly ever get leading roles. So the analysis that they looked at in 2019, there were no female leading roles for actors over 50. And this continues that thread about dialogue. So looking here at the total words spoken by female characters in red and male characters in blue. And what you can see here is that for women, it's women who are 22 to 31 who get most dialogue, and conversely, men who are 42 to 65 get the most dialogue. And also, I mean, I want you to just note that here, the most number of words that the women have is 21 million here for the 38%, but men 42 to 65 get 55 million words, right? It's a huge difference. Similarly to the Bechdel test, this study that I'm citing presented something they called the ageless test. So they say that for a film to pass the ageless test, they have to have at least one female character who is over 50, who matters in the plot, who makes a difference, and the character must be presented in humanising ways. And so the sort of ageist stereotypes that they found, and that they found were more prevalent in women than in older men, was that older women are shown to be stubborn, unattractive, borderline senile, feeble, not able to look after themselves, grumpy, and unfashionable. And you can probably all think of films that have that sort of caricature of an older person. But actually, older people are just people, right? So we should try to avoid these sorts of stereotypes. And this was a study done by the Gina Davis Institute for Gender in Media. You probably have heard of Gina Davis? Maybe. Okay. You should watch some Gina Davis films. Thelma and Louise. Okay, so thinking about technology that we use, thinking about generative AI, do we think that this lack of representation will persist in AI-generated images? What do you think? Who's going to say yes? Yes. Sadly, you're absolutely correct. Okay, so this is moving on to the slightly more technical part of the talk. Who has used generative AI? So maybe something like ChatGPT or DALL-E or something like that. Loads of people. Excellent. Who has used specifically generative AI for images? Lovely. Who knows exactly how all these things work? Oi! Who knows kind of how these things work? Fine. Okay. I'm not really going to go into the technical details. So knowing how those things work is not so important. It helps me, for you to understand the talk. It helps me, though, to know quite where to pitch it. So I'm hearing that nearly everybody has used these things. So that's not news, which is good. Okay, so just a bit of a scamper through the backstory. Generative AI, the idea is you take some text and you get out an image. This field has moved amazingly quickly. So here is something from 2007, and this was, you know, cutting-edge technology in 2007. And the idea here, what this research did was you give a bit of text, and it creates a kind of collage of images that are pertinent to text elements. Okay, so that's quite far from what we're hoping, which is the creation of an entirely new image relating to that text. Okay, then we moved on to, big jump, 2015. So this is a tool called Align Draw. They're generating new images from a text prompt. So this is more what we want to see. How many of you think that if I hadn't put the caption underneath, you would know what those things were meant to be? Yeah. I mean, it's pretty tenuous, isn't it? So maybe the stop sign floating in a blue sky, stop signs are red. Okay, I can kind of get that. The herd of elephants, no, not really. But it shows you that what's happening here is you add a lot of noise to the image. And that, by a process of magic, frankly, will turn more into the image that you're looking for. So there's kind of some manipulation that adds noise but also takes away noise so that you get the images you're looking for. So at that point, 2015, the images were not really brilliant. I mean, you could hardly tell what they're meant to be, let alone worry about the precise content of the images. Moving on to 2022, DALL-E 2 was released. Now, I'm going to caveat straight away and say, yes, other tools exist, and of course, there is a newer version of DALL-E at the moment. This is the one that we used for this research because Lucy did her work last year. So I'm not going to talk about the range of tools there. I've mentioned some of them. They all do broadly the same sort of thing, though. So OpenAI released DALL-E 2, and frankly, sometimes the images it presents are amazingly good. You wouldn't know necessarily that these weren't real photographs. Yeah. or a real painting. So, and the pictures are everywhere now. So how you navigate the online world, knowing that images that you're being presented with aren't even necessarily taken of real things, is very confusing. So we're being presented by a lot of images that are creating a false world potentially. So there's not this apple that's got a bite taken out of it. This cute dog doesn't exist precisely. We didn't put a monkey into space and take a picture of him. I mean, who was taking the picture, right? So it's useful because we can use it to create the images that we need to illustrate stories, newspaper articles, to choose images for a prospectus that provides a picture of happy smiling students sitting on the lawn, studying hard for their exams. You can put that into your engine and get a suitable looking picture out. There are problems. And so you've probably come across this. So DALL-E 2 wasn't really good at faces. I was really not good at fingers. So there's a couple of examples from other articles. So you can see that the faces are kind of blurry and a bit terrifying. And there are too many fingers. I mean, if you look at this, the left-hand one here, like how many people are holding hands here? And are the fingers kind of like fused together? How are we doing this? And so that's a thing that we often think about for generative AI, because it's a really obvious flaw. But the technology will get better. And DALL-E 3 is better at faces and fingers than DALL-E 2 was. So those things will probably come out in the wash eventually in terms of the technicalities. What won't come out in the wash, probably, is bias. So, that should say more important question. I think it's hidden behind the picture. And just to refer back to what we saw in the stop sign floating in a clear blue sky, this is generated by DALL-E 2, probably, or maybe DALL-E 3. Not 2. So it's become much better at generating those images that are realistic. So is Gen AI biased? Yes, it is. Okay, and you already know that. So here's some things that provide examples of that. There have been quite a lot of studies that show how biased generative AI is. So for example, this one was a Bloomberg article. The prompt was a colour photograph of a housekeeper. And are there any men in this picture? No, there are not. Are there any white women in this picture? No. So we get a very non-representational view of what a housekeeper might look like here. I'm going to come back to that picture later as well, because it raises another question for us. Other studies, two that I'm going to mention in particular. So Sasha Lucioni looked at 96,000 images and combined descriptive adjectives, so passionate, I can't think of any adjectives suddenly. It was sad, happy, these sorts of things, and 150 professions. So you can, and the tool is available online, so you can have a look at this. So you can look at things like lawyers or bus drivers or housekeepers or doctors, anything you like. In that 150, it covers a lot of professions. And of course, they found that professions that are stereotypically male in society come up with more male images, and the adjectives maybe are a bit also biased, so more kind of dynamic, leadershipy adjectives tend to make the pictures more male as well. This other study by Luhang Sun again, generated lots of images, as you know you have to do when you're doing this sort of study. They looked at 153 occupations, and what they looked at particularly was gender in those occupations, but also what they called presentational bias. So were the people smiling? Did they appear calm? And something called pose pitch. And we'll look at that a little bit later as well. So pose pitch is to do with whether you're looking up and the camera angle is coming from below you, or whether you're looking down and the camera angle is coming from above you. And so broadly, women tend to be looking down with the camera above them, and that's a bit more of a submissive sort of posture. And the men tend to be more in the opposite, looking upwards, more kind of leadery. Which is crazy, right? Because these are created images. We could choose to create them in a less biased way. So what did we look at? Lucy, who did the study, was inspired to look at this because she was playing around with DALL-E 2, and she wanted to create an image of a woman on a mountaintop thinking pensively about her lost pension. And she generated some images, and none of them were women with white hair. Which is a bit weird, given it's a woman thinking about her lost pension. So you think there might be a connection there with the older women. And she thought, I wonder how many images I'd have to generate to get someone with white hair. And that is basically the research that she did. How many images would you have to generate to get someone with white hair? So, she had 2 text prompts initially. This first line at the bottom is the text prompts that she eventually settled on. Portrait style, colour photograph of a woman against a white background. And this is an example of the sorts of pictures that she got out. If you've used generative AI, you know that sometimes you have to do quite a lot of work with the prompt. We call it prompt wrangling, in order to get the thing that you actually wanted, because the AI misunderstands. It can sometimes take things a bit too literally. So Lucy was interested in using the sorts of tools that we use on real photographs of people to analyse age, race, and emotion. So she wanted something that looked like a real photograph. She wanted there not to be distractions in the background, so hence the white background. A consistent white background makes it easier for the faces to be detected. She wanted them all to be the same, so colour photographs, so it meant that they were all colour photographs, so we're all in a kind of flat baseline. There's no kind of bias that might creep in because some are black and white and some are colour, some are cartoons. So she was trying to take out all that stuff. She cropped it to head and shoulders, again, so that the face would be more recognisable. So that comes through the portrait style. You get that kind of crop, generally. She tried, at one point, adding in facing the camera. That didn't totally work out. So what you tend to get out was people who had cameras instead of faces. So you're like, oh, that's not what I meant. So this is what worked out in the end. And she did a lot of work to get that prompt. And here's an example of, here's an example of some of the men. So it's the same prompt, you just change the word woman to the word man. That's it. Might come back to these pictures. So she used deep face. I'm going to look at age and race today. She also looked at expressions as well. So age. Turns out the answer to the question, how long does it take to get somebody with white hair, is forever, really. So she generated 1,000 images. Admittedly, she could have generated more, but that's a reasonable number in terms of confidence intervals. And what you see here is a plot of the expected ages given the photographs, the results from deep face age classification. So broadly, what we're seeing is that in the DALI 2 generated data, the people are between 20 and 55. Right, so that's these quite attenuated peaks on the left. If you look instead at photographs from UKT FACE, which is a reference data set, then you get this much broader range of ages in the population. And specifically, the thing that's interesting, I think, is that the women's spike is much more peaked than the men's spike. So women are even more focused around a particularly younger age than the men. So on average, the women are about 5 years younger than the men. But there was nothing in the prompt that said anything about that. The prompt didn't say anything about age. It just said man and woman. Looking at that in terms of some other data sets, so I hope you can read this. So here, the left hand, the orangey ones are the women, and the greeny blue ones are the men. So the very left hand column shows the UK population split by age. And so what you can see broadly is that there's, these are the people who are 0 to 20, who did not appear in our data set because we asked for men and women, not for children, right? So we expected there not to be people under 20, probably. And then we've got the ages of people in the next category. This is 30 to 39, so this is not a very helpful legend here. And the biggest chunk, the dark chunk at the top, that's the 60 plus, right? So they are, in fact, 31% of the population, people who are 60 plus. In contrast, what we got from DALI 2 was most of the people in the bottom section, they're actually, sorry, I got that wrong earlier, they're 20 to 29. So the yellow at the bottom, that's 20 to 29. And then this orange bit here, they are 30 to 39. So nearly all of our people in the DALI generation are 20 to 40. Very small number of people older than that. In fact, the oldest woman, I think, was 50. If you look at Shutterstock as a comparison, I mean, nearly 3/4 of their women are between 20 and 29. That's quite skewed data. And you can see the same sort of thing with the men. Well, I didn't generate this very well, sorry. But again, the population is broadly equally spread, a little bit more weighted to older, but what you get out in the generation is very skewed to younger people. We also looked a little bit at race, so this was very much a kind of side bit of Lucy's study. Could be really interesting for further study though. So nearly all the faces were white. You saw that in the examples that we had earlier. So a very small number of people coming out in other races. Deep face uses skin colour to suggest race. So Lucy thought about something that they call prompt leakage. Because if you remember, the prompt said against a white background. Now, if DALI 2 can think when you say facing the camera, that means you want a camera in front of the face, then maybe a white background is not the same as a plain background. So she did a very small study, so she only generated 100 images for this. She still got out the majority of white images. What you're seeing here, the blue line is when we have the white prompt, and the orange bar column is when we use the plain prompt. So we get very slightly more diversity in race if we say plain instead of white. But I mean, I'm looking around the room right now. Clearly, this is not a representation of the UK population, certainly. There could be all sorts of questions here around, well, are we thinking about UK population? Are we thinking about global population? Are we thinking about US population? Because actually, this is a company that's based in the US. What is their training data? There's also something here around social norms. I don't know what you thought about those images when you saw them, but certainly my impression was that a lot of the women are a bit more nicely presented. They nearly all had long hair. Some of them are wearing makeup. Most of them are kind of office smart clothes-wise. The men, actually these ones are quite smart. This guy's quite smart. But the men, on the whole, tend to look a little bit more casual. They're wearing T-shirts. Their hair's maybe a bit all over the place. They look like they've just got out of bed. They look a bit grumpy. I think the men look a bit more grumpy than the women. And you remember I mentioned that work earlier about pose pitch. You see this particularly here in these two. So traditionally, this pose is a pose of kind of dominance, right? So when you've got your arms folded, then that's a kind of more leadership kind of pose. It's a bit weird. So you can see that in the man. The man is looking really kind of confident and assertive because he's got his arms folded. I don't know, what do you think about the woman? Do you think she looks confident and assertive? She also has her arms folded. I don't know, I think she looks a bit defensive, actually. And it's also got that higher camera angle, you know, so that's a kind of more submissive pose. So one of the things that we did not do, because master's projects are only so long, and there were tons of other questions that we could have asked, is thinking about what these presentational aspects of the pictures are like, and are there things that we can detect about men and women from these pictures in terms of submission and dominance, and whether they represent good role models. Okay, so these are things that we certainly think about, and the companies think about, and they are trying, okay? They're just not getting it right. So, for example, OpenAI have the red team, and the red team look at risk and harmful capabilities of their tools. So, what they look at really mainly, though, at the moment is, are the images we're generating sexualized or violent? And that's the kind of stuff that they're filtering out at the moment. And they're not really looking at how do we get rid of some of these biases that come from maybe societal norms, maybe older societal norms, because of course pictures are historical on the internet. Who saw the Gemini AI story? It was about 3-4 weeks ago now. Yeah, okay. So Gemini AI, another generative AI, was released very briefly and then almost immediately withdrawn because it produced images like this. So if you say, show me some images of US senators, and this prompt says diverse particularly, but it happened even for if you didn't have the word diverse in the prompt, then you do get more diversity in the images, but for historical images, that's entirely inappropriate, right? There was no black female senator in the 1800s in the US, right? So they tried, and that's good. They didn't quite get it right. So, in fact, the first female senator was 1922. And the first black female senator was probably the 70s? I don't know. I should have done that research. Okay, so they're trying, but, you know, more to go here. Okay, so why are these problems happening? It's about the training data. Because although they're using a vast number of photographs in order to create the AI behind generating these images, then that training data is somehow already biased. So they can do things to filter, to manipulate, to get rid of biases, but they're not currently doing that yet. I wanted to end on a note of what can you do about it, right? Because you're about to embark on your careers in IT, in computing science, in data science, in technology, or possibly in some other field entirely. You might decide that technology is not really for you. But, you know, we can all help each other by pointing out those biases, by doing research like this to say, oh, but what about these things? You could perhaps be aiming for a job in the development of these sorts of tools. by being part of a more diverse team, then that might inspire the team to think a bit more carefully about the biases. And so I put up these cards. These are from International Women's Day this year, but things about maintaining an inclusive mindset. And it's lovely how inclusive Lovelace always is. But, you know, you have to work at maintaining an inclusive mindset. You have to think about what are all those other people like, what do they need? And we will challenge all of these kinds of stereotypes, discrimination and bias as we go about our daily lives. If it's not happening to us, it might be happening to somebody next to us. And we, I think, all have a responsibility to stand up for our colleagues, our friends, or just, you know, average people on the street that we're seeing some kind of injustice, and saying, actually, what's going on here? Is this wrong? Can I call out this person safely? It does sometimes feel like being in an underrepresented minority is a source of endless work in championing that minority. But we're all in it together, you know, and I think one of the things that gives me heart is that, you know, we can all do this together, and to improve things, because things have certainly improved, certainly since I was an undergraduate back in 1985. Okay, thank you very much for listening. What questions do you have?
Carron. So Carron will be around all day.
Yes.
And I'm sure Carron would love people to come up to her at any point in the day and ask questions you didn't get to ask here. But we will take a couple of questions here. What would you like to ask Carron?
Human biases come with generated AI biases as well, right? There's no way to actually get rid of human biases. Thank you. There's no way to actually get rid of human biases. If humans are going to make AI, there is always going to be AI biases, and that I don't know what would be the best way of combating that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, there are always human biases, but we can pay attention to that, you know. So I think we can all be aware of the biases that we might have, and I know we talk about unconscious bias, but you can also be aware that you might have unconscious bias, right? And so I think it's incumbent on all of us to stop and say, am I being fair here? Am I making this judgment based on facts that are right in front of me, or am I making them based on something else in my past? And that takes a lot of work, actually. Yeah, but I think we can do that to mitigate against our own biases. And certainly in terms of AI developers, then they can, I mean, I think they in some ways have a better opportunity to do that, because they can build that anti-bias, if you like, into the system. I mean, look at what Google has done with Gemini AI. They tried to build a kind of anti-bias into their system by making more diverse representations, but they got it a bit wrong. That probably works nicely for photographs that they're trying to present of maybe a world that we'd like to be in, rather than the world that we're currently in, or the world that we were in the 1800s. So I think actually in some ways with software development we might have a better chance of, I was going to say eliminating, we're never going to eliminate bias, you're absolutely right, but lessening those biases and using it to present the world that we want to be in, rather than the world of the past. Thanks.
Sounds good.
Great
Thank
question.
you.
There's somebody here.
I can shout. So for the specific Google one, the Gemini, sorry. Why was it a problem? Okay. Why was it a problem that we've got these different sentences that don't exist? Because this is like a generative AI. Of course, that's not factually accurate.
I mean, I think in some ways you've answered your own question there. It's not factually accurate. And so if we're using it to represent history, then
But, like, neither is an elephant in the sky, right? Like...
Yeah, okay. Fair. But how will you know? I think that's the thing. You know, so obviously the elephant in the sky is really obviously wrong. But what about more subtle representations? I think that, you know, if you've got a photograph that purports to be now and it's all white men, you would complain about it, right? Because, unless it's the Garrick Club, obviously. But, you know, we're not wanting to see that kind of society. How do we know the difference between the photograph that's been generated and an actual photograph? How are we navigating the world of real and fake? And so I think Gemini AI have done potentially a good thing here because they're trying to include more representation. There was a massive public backlash because it was just so clearly wrong and factually incorrect. You know, so obviously they need to navigate some way through that to be able to, I don't know, flag up that images are idealised or presenting something that's factually incorrect.
But is the goal of generative AI to sort of put it in a box and make it realism and sort of to fool us? Like, should it not be the goal to make it idealized and you can sort of be like, oh, this is AI and this is generated and obviously this isn't true?
I think that's a great question, and I think that's a question that we haven't really figured out the answer to yet. I think my worry is that it's getting better all the time. So being able to say those things are generative AI and these things are real will soon become very difficult to tell apart. So we won't be able to have that separation of knowing what's real and what's not real. I'm going to turn that back to you, right? This is a question that I think you all have to answer. You know, and we all have to work together to answer in the coming years. How do we use AI in a way that doesn't totally mess up our whole society?
Yeah, I think with the... I just wanted to ask, with the senators, I think the issue perhaps there with Gemini, was it maybe because it asked for specifically 1800s, which sometimes, for example, ChatGPT would say, well, actually, this is not factually correct. I cannot generate that due to these reasons. However, Gemini, just because they prompted it with the word diverse, it just tried to make it be, instead of coming back and saying, this is not factually correct, would you like me to generate just an imaginary diverse US senator from the with the dress of 1800s of historical representation?
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair point. Absolutely, that would be a way around the problem. Yeah, so you can clearly flag up what this image comes from. Yeah.
So when you ask ChatGPT about like certain political opinions, it's kind of designed to take a very non-biased approach. Mm-hmm. But that means that like when you ask it about feminism, it kind of responds with I'm not going to talk about whether I agree or disagree with feminism. I'm not designed for that. What do you think like is the correct response to that?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I mean, right now, I would not want to know what ChatGPT thinks about these things, right? Because I did an exercise. I was doing some Boolean algebra for a question in an assessment last year. And I thought, well, I'm going to put this into ChatGPT to see what it says. And it can't even get Boolean algebra right, okay? And, you know, there are rules. There are really clear rules about how you do manipulation of expressions. So if it can't do that, no, I don't trust what it says about feminism at all. That's interesting. I mean, I think at the moment the guardrails, like I mentioned here, like the red team, the guardrails at the moment are very much focused on making things neutral and not provocative, and maybe being a feminist has become quite provocative these days. Maybe we can have some AIs that are more, in the future, more able to talk about those sorts of things accurately? Not yet.